Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. Manhattan Media is a company that owns 5 newspapers and 2 magazines, and they cover neighborhoods of Manhattan and bring us the news from the streets that we live on and about the people we know. Tom Allon is the president, and he's my guest today, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
These are your publications. Let's start with the newspapers.
Sure.
They're so interesting because they're weeklies, they're free, and they're local. I mean, they really talk about the neighborhoods we live in.
We actually like to call it controlled circulation, which is a great euphemism for free, which means we can make sure that the people that we want to read it get it. So we put it in doorman buildings around and non-doorman buildings on the Upper West Side and Upper East Side and downtown. So we can tell you how many people are picking it up each week, and it's the new model that I think is working. If with the internet, with everything being free, paid circulation is a dead model.
So it's the advertisers that are paying.
It's the advertiser part. I mean, when the Village Voice went free a number of years ago, that I think affirmed in everybody's mind that this is a model of the future.
And was that successful there?
I think it has been for them. I think otherwise they would have gone out of business by now.
Right.
And anybody that's paid these days, and you're seeing it with the dailies declining circulation, they're on a death spiral.
Right.
Free weeklies, I think, are a booming business. In fact, in 2002, there were 7.2 million people in New York State reading weeklies. Now 11.1 million is in circulation. So it's growing while daily circulation is declining.
And you're the president-elect of the statewide association
New York Press Association.
Weeklies. What do you call it? The New York Press Association?
The New York Press Association. It's 650 weeklies around New York State.
So we've always had weeklies.
We've always had weeklies.
I mean, did newspapers start as weeklies historically? Do you know?
I think they probably started as annuals, in Ben Franklin's time there was, the Poor Richard's Almanac and things like that. But I think the daily is a relatively recent concept. And I think as we move into the future with the internet sort of being able to give us information on what's going on globally, I think weeklies and papers like that are going to be even more important because the internet, I don't think, provides local information well.
Well, the circulation is really going down for our dailies here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The dailies locally are
Your
suffering.
papers cover Manhattan?
Yes, all of our papers are in Manhattan.
What do you estimate your circulation to be in Manhattan if you add them all together?
It's 67,000 each week, and they're all ABC audited, so they're verified.
That's terrific.
So and with all of our publications, including our magazines, which we'll talk about, we have 150,000 circulation in Manhattan, which after the New York Times is the second largest circulation in Manhattan.
And the Times, the circulation is shockingly low. It's only 200.
It's 200,000. Actually, I think it might even be down to like 185,000 in Manhattan.
Can you believe that?
It's dwindling. The Times is suffering its own problems.
Well, they all are, right? The news. I don't know what their circulation is in Manhattan, but citywide, it's
the News and the Post. I know. Last time I looked in Manhattan, had barely 100,000 in Manhattan. It's a dying model. Paid circulation is really not the wave of the future.
When you talk about paid circulation, you also mean newsstand sales.
Yes, newsstand and subscriptions.
So what is the polite way of talking about free?
Controlled circulation.
Controlled circulation.
You control where it goes.
And you really do control the circulation because you are really publishing in the more affluent areas of the borough.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Although we're borough-wide up to 135th Street now.
Yeah.
We started a newspaper last year downtown that goes 28th Street and below.
So let's talk about what the papers are.
Sure. On the Upper West Side, the one that covered you during your years in government, the Westside Spirit, which has been around since 1985, and it has a circulation of 20,000 in about 900 doorman buildings from 28th Street up to 135th Street.
Did the Spirit start as the Spirit, or was that the Westside News or the Westsider?
The Spirit started as the Westside Spirit, actually. In 1985, it was founded. There were a couple of weeklies that were around before then, including Wisdom's Child and Westside News.
The Westside News, I remember from way back.
And the Westsider, which is one of our papers now as well.
The first time I ever met Jack Newfield, he was walking down Broadway with Henry Stern. This is the former Parks Commissioner. This was in the 60s, and he had just been fired from the Westside News.
Oh, that's funny.
I always remember that. He was looking for a job.
A lot of illustrious people came through the weeklies in Manhattan. On the East Side, you had the East Side Express, which was Clay Felker's newspaper many years ago.
What happened to that?
That folded. There's a.
So I'm sorry, I interrupted your thing. Right. So we have the Westside
Spirit. Our Town, which is our weekly on the East Side, and that goes from 28th Street up to 100th Street on the East Side in about 1,000.
That was originally Morty.
It was actually owned by a guy named Ed Kayat for many years.
Yes, I remember that. Wasn't Morty somebody, the editor? Morty, I can't remember his name. Anyway.
Our Town had been around for about 20 years before we bought it back in the early 90s, and Ed Kayat was a eccentric figure on the East Side who would go after landlords particularly. So we bought that back in the early 90s. And then we have a new paper downtown called Our Town Downtown, which is 28th Street down to the Battery. We started last May.
And that's East and West?
East and West, and that's become very successful. And it's a little different than the Uptown papers because it reflects a younger audience.
And you're able to target these audiences,
exactly.
So you target your editorial comment, right?
Exactly. I look at these as sort of niche publications, and they're able to cater to the populations that they.
So how do the interests differ in the different parts of the city?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that Uptown and Downtown are becoming more alike, actually. The downtown audience, I think, tends to be more interested in the arts, tends to be more interested in real estate on the rental side. Uptown, usually when people move uptown, they're moving uptown to start a family, which is sort of what I did.
That's interesting.
Which is
so
what
the
I
singles
did.
are downtown.
More singles are downtown, although again, that's morphing a little bit. I mean,
yeah.
Tribeca is becoming the fastest growing area for families. So there is more of that downtown as well. But traditionally, downtown has been an area where single people.
So what are your stories and what's the editorial content?
Of downtown? Mm-hmm. Well, then we had a big piece about the controversy about the new Trump hotel downtown.
Where is that going to be?
In Soho, there was a Trump hotel. That, in fact, there was some excavation being done, and they dug up some old remains. So the construction was halted for a couple of days. So there's a community that's risen up against that. Downtown still has an activist community, I think more so in some respects than downtown, and there has been more opposite. Than uptown, I mean.
Yeah. Even the West Side?
Yeah, the West Side isn't, I think, our the West Side that you and I may have remembered.
Slightly different, age different, but it's all right.
It's not quite as I think the Upper West Side has become more like the Upper East Side over the last 10 years, and I think, real estate values and property values reflect that. I was with an old friend who I grew up with on the Upper West Side in the playground recently, and we were both lamenting that it's really fewer academics, fewer artists, and
they can't afford it anymore.
Right, a lot more investment bankers.
Us included, we can't afford it.
Exactly.
It's just incredible.
We're hanging by a thread here too.
Yeah.
So I think the Upper West Side has, I think, become a little bit more like the Upper East Side, and then places like Montclair, New Jersey, like we talked about before, and Brooklyn are becoming more like the Upper West Side.
Where are the West Side people moving to?
I think Park Slope.
But that's getting.
I think that they say Brooklyn is the new Manhattan and Queens is the new Brooklyn, and I think people are kind of moving around.
And what's happening in the Bronx?
Parts of the Bronx, like Riverdale, are becoming very.
Now Riverdale has a long history of a weekly.
Yes, there is a wonderful weekly up in Riverdale that are owned by the Stein brothers.
Right.
In fact, they won a Pulitzer Prize back in the mid-'90s for some of their coverage, and they were also, I think, the subject of a bomb threat when they came out for Salman Rushdie.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, do you run editorials?
Yes, we do. We run editorials.
Are they the same in the papers, or do they differ?
The Uptown paper is generally the same, and the Downtown paper generally is different.
That's very
we try to keep it specific to the neighborhoods that we do, but and sometimes the West Side editorial will be different than the East Side editorial if it's a specific topic. For example, this week we're editorializing about, there's a controversy about the Randall's Island Foundation, which is trying to build ball fields, which are sorely needed in the city. And there's been this back and forth with the borough president, Scott Stringer, who's weighed in on this one, because the independent schools, the private schools, have offered lots of money to get, I think initially it was going to be exclusive rights to the fields from 3 to 6 every day. I think it's been negotiated down through a lot of give and take down to 67% of the fields. But that money is necessary to maintain these fields. So we had a lively discussion about it in our editorial department, and there was some back and forth. What's
Stringer's position?
Well, Stringer's position is that this is an elitist thing, and that that the public schools and other schools are being shut out. I think I don't think he's looking at this. It's more of a gray issue, and I think the money is absolutely necessary, and I think a fair agreement's been negotiated.
So do you consider that an East Side issue or an Uptown issue?
That I consider an East and West issue, but more of an Uptown issue, because the people who send their kids to independent schools tend to live on the Upper East Side and Upper West Side. So we'll run that in our Uptown papers, and that'll be the editorial this week.
And then, do you take political stands?
We do.
You endorse candidates?
We endorse candidates. I mean, I would say after the New York Times, I think our endorsement is one of the most coveted in Manhattan, because people that read papers like these are voters. There was a survey done by an East Side political consultant a couple of years ago, and they asked 400 East Side voters what publications they read, and our town doubled any other weekly in town, including The Voice, including New York Magazine, because people who really want to know what's going on in their neighborhood tend to read papers like these, and those are voters. So
it was always interesting to me with the Spirit, because you're always soliciting advertising, right? And all the politicians take out ads. And I felt that really was an ethical conflict. And so I always resisted your attempts to sell me an ad, right?
And I always backed off very quickly. There was never any connection.
I mean, it is a little bit, right? It's like a
put it this way,
campaign contribution.
There are people who have spent a lot of money in our papers who didn't get endorsed, and vice versa.
And do they get angry? Do they call you up?
Some get angry, and some maybe think there's an implicit quid pro quo, but there's not, and we never put it out that way.
Right.
We've been pretty good about putting on our commercial hat and being clear that's our commercial hat. And then, when it comes to endorsement time, we do it on the merits. A couple of years ago, there was a candidate on the East Side who spent over $100,000 in advertising in our newspapers. And we ended up endorsing his opponent because we felt that was the right thing to do. And that's, I think, the way we do things.
Do you spend more of your time on the business side or on the editorial side?
Much to probably the chagrin of my Columbia journalism professors, I spend most of my time on business these days, both in selling, marketing, and managing. And it's necessary because I think publications like these, which rely purely on advertising revenue, need a pretty aggressive.
So, are you the publisher of all the papers?
I'm the publisher and president of the company. Yeah.
So all the company has different editors.
But they're editors and there are publishers of each of the publications as well. Actually, technically, I'm the president of the company, and so I don't really.
You're not.
I don't function on a day-to-day as a publisher.
Do you also, when you're selling, you can just sell to an advertiser for downtown?
Sure. I mean, one of the beauties of publications like this is if you're, you can narrowcast and say, if you're a restaurant on 10th Street, you reach people only in a small area, you can run just in our downtown paper. But if you're, New York Health and Racquet Club and you want to reach people citywide, you can run in all the publications.
Let's now talk about the news part of it.
Sure.
The Times, I think, comes under a lot of criticism from people like me because it's no longer local. I mean, its local news is tri-state, basically, and they spend very little time on local news, right? The Post spends sensational local news, and the news too. I mean, they really. So it falls to you to really do local news.
Which is why papers like these, I think, are succeeding. People want to know what's going on down their block. What's that new building going up down the block? What about that new store 2 blocks away that's closing down? What about that restaurant that opened 10 blocks away? We can do, and we have done for many years, that kind of nitty-gritty sort of local coverage that people have come to rely on. And if you do it in a balanced, fair way like we've done, I think you succeed.
Do you publish hearing dates and things like that? Have you gone that far?
We don't do that, but we do. I mean, we do cover the community boards and we do cover the meetings that are coming up, and we have a calendar of events that are going on. So, if you're the local school that's having a bake sale, you can have your calendar listing put in our papers.
Now, New York One attempts to do local.
Yeah, they do some stuff well.
Yeah. And I thought that there was a lot of talk about the internet becoming local.
I think
what is happening with that?
I think that's the one application on the internet, or one of the applications that's still not anywhere near, and I'm not sure that'll ever be. Because you really need people on the ground. You need people who know what's going on in their block.
It's too costly.
It's too costly, and I think I just don't see how on the internet there's a way to cover that kind of use. At the end of the day, it's all about content, and it's all about having people who are trustworthy as reporters on the ground. I think the internet has become a good place for blogging, for people who have opinions, but for covering news, I think.
And that's the difference. I mean, people say, "Oh, you have blogs," but blogs are
purely people's opinions. They're unfiltered, they're unedited. One of the great things about, and I'm bullish on all types of newspapers, not just weeklies, is that, if it's a brand that has an editor or editors that people trust, and they can filter what's important, what's not important, and what's credible and what's not credible, then I think those are the publications that are going to succeed.
All right, let's go back to these publications. City Hall, this is the newest publication.
This is my little pet project, which has gotten off to a great start.
How old is this now?
It's 6 months old. It's our baby of all of our publications.
And how often do you publish it?
It's a monthly, but it also has a website called cityhallnews.com. It's modeled on a publication that I helped start about a decade ago down in Washington, D.C. called The Hill. Down on Capitol Hill, there's 3 or 4 newspapers that cover Congress and the executive branch. And I always thought that a version of this in New York would be,
Is The Hill a daily or weekly?
The Hill is now 3 times a week. Roll Call is 3 times a week. And they started out as weeklies. Roll Call was a weekly for many years. So we started this as a monthly. with this daily website. We're going to launch a series of breakfasts this year where we're going to get elected leaders to speak to small groups, 25, 30 people of business leaders, civic leaders, and other activists. We're hoping to launch also a directory to government, which I think we have an interesting twist on, which I'd rather not reveal here, but I think that will be very interesting.
And is this free also?
That is actually, again, a controlled circulation, but the beauty of this circulation is it's mailed to the mayor's home, the governor's home, every elected leader both at home and in their office, every chief of staff, every registered lobbyist, every head of the union. So it's kind of 5,000 people around New York State, but arguably the most powerful 5,000 people in New York State. So one of the beauties of a publication like this is if you want to reach the mayor, and I know that he reads it, I told you, I'll tell a quick funny story. Yeah. In the August issue of City Hall, there was a story about whether the Mayor Bloomberg is going to run for president, and if he does, what are his chances? And in fact, Jimmy Breslin, your husband, was quoted in that. And after that issue came out, one of the deputy mayors put a copy of it on his desk, folded to that page. And the mayor apparently came over a little while later and said, "Thank you for showing me this issue of City Hall with a story about me, but why didn't you show me this ad on the opposite page from the PBA that was knocking me?" And that's really the beauty of a publication. Is I think as lobbying becomes more and more restrictive and more difficult.
This is a more sophisticated way to lobby.
Well, it's an advocacy. Yeah. It becomes an advocacy publication, and it becomes a much more transparent way of lobbying.
So can you log on to the website if you're anybody?
Sure, anybody can go to the website, cityhallnews.com. It gets quite a bit of traffic. It's updated, if not daily, then every other day.
Right.
There's new stories and new features on it. I think it's going to become the place for news about what's going on in government.
And eventually you're going to have to interconnect it to some of your more active communities.
That's what we're hoping to do, is to get really local leaders speaking to the activists in the neighborhood.
Right. So then we have our town, which we've talked about, right?
The Westside Spirit.
The Westside Spirit. You started...
I became the editor of the Westside Spirit 20 years ago when it was 1 year old.
And who were some of your writers that have gone on?
We've had some very distinguished alumni. Jimmy Rutenberg, who covers the White House for the New York Times now, was one of our editors.
I feel like what is the expression with the mother who fells or something?
Right.
I always feel he used to call the office all the time. So now, right?
It gives us nachas from he's really, whenever I interview reporters, I always point to people like Jimmy Rutenberg and say, you can come and make a name for yourself at a publication like this. Yeah. We hope you stay for 5-10 years, but if you really want to move on, there's a great
Corey,
model. He wasn't with us, but
he wasn't with you. Where did
he was with another publication, another weekly in town. But Jim McKinley, who's the Mexico City bureau chief of the New York Times, was an editor with us. Faye Penn, who's an editor of New York Magazine. We've had some interesting alumni also, and on the art side of our business, Judge Bork's son was our art director. Senator Moynihan's son was our art director for a number of years. So
that's great.
It's been a great breeding ground for talented people.
So we have downtown, which we talked about. We didn't talk about the Chelsea Clinton News and the Westsider because they're a little different in your package,
They're smaller
right?
paid circulation publications. They've been around. Chelsea Clinton News has been around for 65 years. The Westsider for 30 years.
I remember my friend Bob Trentline.
Yes, Bob was the.
And now this has advertising.
It does.
But its basis is still circulation. You
Both.
charge.
It's charged, and it's Hillary Clinton actually held that up on the air after she was elected, saying this paper is older than my daughter. But she wasn't named after it.
That's very good. So then you have these magazines.
Right. We have two magazines.
We've got Avenue,
which I always joke it's a very rarefied community publication, but for the wealthiest community in America, East Side society particularly. And it's
when
been around.
I used to live on Central Park, I was always amused because we got Avenue, and that was always an indication. I remember I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Herman Wouk, who was an author and wrote The Caine Mutiny, and he also wrote Marjorie Morningstar, which was about a young woman growing up on the West Side. And he gave us the economic breakdown. The wealthiest people live on Central Park West. The next wealthiest live on Riverside Drive. West End Avenue was the third.
Right,
it's the lowest. So that's the demographic, and it's still there, I guess.
It's probably true still these days. But in the old days, where you'd be afraid to walk on Columbus Avenue in Amsterdam, those were affluent areas as well.
Absolutely. So Avenue is
predominantly
also free.
It's free. It was actually the first free magazine in America back when it started.
Is that right?
It was started in 1975 by a woman named Judy Price. Who had been the editor and publisher for many years. We bought it from her, or actually a company that she had sold to about 4 years ago. It's got a wonderful storied history as well. Some wonderful people have come through Avenue. And it has
some wonderful features about buildings.
Exactly. And old New York, Christopher Gray writes a column.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
In this current issue, there's a great interview with Carl Icahn. He never gives interviews to anybody. He tells some very fun stories. Big story about the art market.
But you can't pick this up at a newsstand.
It's not on the newsstand. It's put in every Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue buildings, also some Central Park West.
And now you have New York Family.
New York Family is one of our new babies as well. It's about a year and a half old in our ownership, and it's tripled in size. It is the parenting market right now in Manhattan is a real sweet spot.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because a number of young families living here. It's increased, hasn't it, demographically?
There was actually a statistic in the New York Times that there's 25% more children under the age of 5 than there were 5 years ago.
Right.
So I think what's happening is people aren't leaving Manhattan like they used to raise their kids in the suburbs, since things are safe here and the schools are great. And I think people are having more children. There's more 3s and more 4s. I think somebody told me at a dinner party recently that 3 is the new 2. So so I think that accounts for this baby boom. And this publication is a great publication for that audience, because it gives you everything from where to send your kid to camp, or which after-school class to send them to fun humorous advice on potty training or disciplining your naughty child.
And this is also free.
It's a free circulation publication. It's in 1,500 buildings throughout Manhattan, east and west and downtown. It's also in private schools and public schools. It's in pediatricians' offices. It's really blanketing.
Suppose if it doesn't get distributed to your house, how do you get one of these?
People can go online to our website, manhattanmedia.com, and they can subscribe to it. It's inexpensive. They can have it mailed to their homes.
Oh, that's great. Out of this, you're going to have a fair.
Right. One of the things that we do, in addition to all of our newspapers, and this is really the model at our company, we do a lot of events as well.
Right.
We're doing 2 camp fairs at the end of January.
What does that mean? It means all the camp?
We'll take over like the auditorium at Rodef Shalom on the Upper West Side one Sunday, and that's Sunday, January 29th. And from noon to 3, we'll have 70 camps exhibiting there. They'll have videos about their camp, and they'll have brochures, and hundreds of parents will come that day.
And that's sleepaway and day?
Sleepaway and day camps, all over the Northeast. And we'll do that on Sunday on the Upper West Side and Saturday on the Upper East Side.
Where is it going to be there?
At a church on East 75th Street called St. Jean Baptiste. And again, if anybody goes to our website, manhattanmedia.com, they can find out information about this. We also do
the Blackboard Awards.
This has become a very big deal over the last 5 years. My partner and I in the business, we have young children, and 5 years ago when we were starting to look at schools, we realized there was no resource guide available for parents to tell them both public, private, parochial, and charter school information. You would talk to the person next door who sent their kid to one school, and they give you one piece of advice.
There is a group.
There's a parents league. There's also InsideSchools.org, which is all public school related.
Right.
So actually, Clara Hempel is on our board of advisors. So,
that's good.
What we decided to do is we put together a board of advisors that cut across public, private, parochial, and charter schools. It's a lovely panel. Clara Hempel's on it. Vicki Goldman and Catherine Hausman, who wrote the book about Manhattan private schools. Various other education experts. And so what we do is we compile, and we have a website, blackboardawards.com, where I think last year we had 1,500 parents that actually voted on what was good about their school and what wasn't good about their school. And so we use all that data, and we put out, it's a 4-part series in the newspapers. 1 week it's preschools, then elementary, then middle, then high school. Tons of information for parents where they can compare. And then the panel picks what we call the outstanding school of the year in each category. So the outstanding elementary public school, the outstanding private middle school. And we'll have an award ceremony then in October. It's a lovely evening. It's been called the Oscars for educators, because these are people who just never get recognition. Yeah. And for one night they feel like they're top of the world. Frank McCourt was the MC for a couple of years, the award-winning.
Tell us how you know Frank McCourt.
Oh, Frank and I taught high school together at Stuyvesant many years ago. Before I went into journalism, I taught at my alma mater.
Stuyvesant.
The truth be told, Frank and I used to combine our classes on Fridays so that one of us could go hang out in the park. But Frank has been a wonderful supporter of the Blackboard Awards.
So, and this has a website?
It has a website, blackboardawards.com.
Right.
And we encourage parents to go to that to tell us information.
So we have a whole list of websites.
We have websites, cityhallnews.com, blackboardawards.com. The company's website is manhattanmedia.com, which has all this information.
And then you can link to all of these.
Exactly.
Right. So that's the one really to look at.
Exactly. Yeah. That tells you about all the publications. Yeah. And I think over time we're going to be starting other websites that give parents and other people in New York information that's useful to them.
So what do you think is going to happen with newspapers?
I think, like any industry, those that are good and know their customers and know their readers really well, which I think people who work on the ground will succeed and will continue to thrive. I mean, I think Dick Parsons had an interesting statement a while back. He said, as long as there's the 3 B's, print will survive. Bedroom, bathroom, and beach. Because who wants to, take a computer, into bed or on the beach? People want to read. They want to feel. It's a textural thing. Not to say that these publications that we do won't have digital versions of them, but I do believe that people, it's part of a reading experience. It's like a book. You really want to, and especially magazines and newsprint is getting so much better with its use of color and its design that I think something that's well designed is a different kind of reading.
You've really had a wonderful life with this.
I've enjoyed it.
You went to Stuyvesant. You grew up on the West Side. You went to Stuyvesant. You went to Cornell. You went to Columbia. You then went to work for the Westside Spirit. When did you go to the Queen's Tribune?
Oh, actually, well, I worked at the New York Times briefly after graduate school, and then I became the editor of the Westside Spirit, which was a sister paper to the Queen's Tribune. That was part of the same chain.
And you met your wife.
I met my wife, the best hire I ever made. I was the editor of the Westside Spirit, and she applied for a job, and I was about to go on vacation. I said, I'll give you a tryout when I get back, and 15 years later, she's still there.
And she's not still at the Westside Spirit. She's now doing what?
She's an editor at large on Avenue. She writes she writes 2 stories a month for Avenue. She just did a cover story this next issue on Richard Johnson, the editor of Page 6. And she wrote a big piece about the art market. She was a reporter at the Times for a couple of years. Yeah. But we have 3 sort of unruly children at home, so we need to have somebody close to home.
And there's nothing better than the experience of working on a local paper in addition to reading it, right?
It's wonderful being, I always enjoyed being a big fish in a small pond. And you can have reader feedback. I get calls from readers saying, I didn't like that story, or why don't you do something about this, or can my son have an internship at your papers?
And it's great for a reader to be able to talk to you. So we've come to an end. Okay. We appreciate your efforts and all your work.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.